Right, there we are, 2 o'clock. Welcome to this afternoon's Our World Reimagined session from GCVS. I'm Susie Scott, I work for GCVS and I'm here to welcome you to the session. Really looking forward to today's session with Dr. Angela O'Hagan, talking about the caring economy. I'm going to stop any second now and hand over to Penny so that we maximize the time available for Angela to speak and all your questions to come in. So over to you, Penny.
Thank you so much, Susie, and welcome to everyone who's joined this Our World Reimagined session. This is the 7th in the series, and I have to say, I personally have found each presentation extremely stimulating. We've heard exciting ideas, challenging ideas, and you end up with a sense of optimism that we can come out of this better. So just in case, for anybody that wants to know, I'm a journalist. I specialize in health and social care, and this has been fascinating to be part of. This week, as you've heard, we're welcoming Dr. Angela O'Hagan. Last week, we heard about creating a well-being economy. This week, it's creating a caring economy. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of dovetailing between the two. Just before we get stuck into hearing from Angela and taking your questions, I just want to talk you, anyone that isn't au fait with Zoom, if you roll your cursor over your screen, you'll see a panel along the bottom with a few icons. Click on Q&A and that opens a box that you can move to the side of your screen where you can ask questions of the speakers. And we're going to be joined later on by Kathleen Caskey, Glasgow Third Sector Interface Network, who'll be joining the conversation. So if you have any questions that relate to your field, your particular area of interest, please pose them there. If you click on the chat button, that opens up another panel on the right of the screen where we share information, links, whatever. If you're into tweeting, please use the hashtag OWR Big Ideas, and that will share what you're hearing here with the world, basically, which isn't a bad objective, is it? So on the Q&A as well, if somebody's asked a question that you all want to ask, just click like and it promotes it up the list, and you can ask a question anonymously if you wish. So that is enough from me to kick us off. I'd very much like to introduce, probably lots of you already know her, Dr. Angela O'Hagan. Hi, Angela.
Hi, hello, Penny. Thank you, and thank you to Susie.
Great to see you. I just wondered, but before we start with your presentation, and then we'll pick up with questions, so please get your questions in, guys. Tell us a bit about what has brought you here, your career to date. How come you're working on these issues now, where you're working on them?
Well, it's, obviously, despite my very youthful appearance, I've only been working in these issues a short time. No, I've been working in gender equality and equalities and human rights for a long time. And for me, it's about the political change that is necessary and possible. And that's about institutional change, about how public policy is made. And that equalities and human rights aren't an add-on. They're not a secondary thing that you do after you've done the important business of, transport policy or healthcare or whatever. It has to be our starting point. And I think I learned that very much when I was with the Equal Opportunities Commission in the 90s, and I used to work with employers, and employers would often say, oh, how far do we have to go with this equality stuff? Well, as long as it takes, until you stop discriminating in the workplace, until we stop seeing some of the unequal outcomes. And I always felt we needed much more connection between gender equality and ideas around equal opportunities and ideas about counting people, but actually taking a much more transformative approach. And that means transforming how we make public policy decisions and how we make public spending decisions. And so that's why, for me, gender budgeting makes complete sense, because it's about how if we take the idea that the budget is the principal expression of a government's priorities, because it's where it's spending our money and how it's raising money from us. So how that money is spent to address existing and persistent inequalities and not reinforce them is absolutely what we need to be doing. And so the starting point there is how is always asking of policymakers and politicians, parliamentarians, is what's being proposed going to address inequality and advance equality of outcome? And if it's not, then why are we doing it?
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I'd like to invite you, if you wouldn't mind, to fill us in on this caring economy. Take it away, Dr. O'Hagan.
I still have to get used to being Dr. O'Hagan. I was late to academia in my career and decided to embark on a PhD pregnant and 40. It was an interesting time. And I've never found the door out, but I'm very delighted to be part of the Wise Centre for Economic Justice at GCU. And I've also been part of the Women's Budget Group, the Scottish Women's Budget Group since its foundation, and the UK Women's Budget Group, and international organisations as well. And it's the UK Women's Budget Group that have brought us to this idea of a caring economy. About 18 months ago, we initiated, the Commission established the Commission on a Gender Equal Economy, which I think sounds really cool. I really like that phrase. A gender equal economy is I think, a tremendous aspiration. And what we did was trying to take an approach that is based on understanding that unequal outcomes are the consequences of structural inequalities. The way that political systems, the way that economic systems, the way that social structures and institutions are structured result in different outcomes for different people, and that they're highly gendered in relation, and highly gendered in relation to care. And we hear that in all sorts of ways. And we hear it from men talking about men's access and men's caring as fathers and parents. But we also know that women are the majority of unpaid carers, women are the majority of the social care workforce, and indeed of the healthcare workforce, the majority of the childcare workforce. And it's no surprise that we then realise that those jobs are amongst the lowest paid jobs, because we've continued collectively, institutionally, structurally, not to value care, the provision of care and the receipt of care, something that we all do at different ways and at different times over the life course, but something that's not valued. It's not in how we remunerate it and how we regard how people spend their time. So the Commission was established, and as I say, looked at trying to take an approach where we looked at these structural or structures of inequality that result in economic inequality, because it's that economic and the inequality of economic status that is our vehicle, from a gender budgeting perspective, our vehicle for change. So part of the structures of inequality, of course, is the economy and how economic models function to maintain and reinforce gendered inequality. And fundamental to those models and how the economy currently works, as I say, is that consistent undervaluing of care. There are over 1 million unpaid carers in Scotland. There are 200,000 people employed in the social care sector in Scotland, with a sectoral value of about 3.4 billion to the Scottish economy as an economic sector. But yet we never hear about care being a key sector in the economy. Food and drink, biosciences, yes, renewables, all important sectors. But care is absolutely fundamental. And we saw that at the start of lockdown. In relation to COVID, just how central care and care services are to support what economists like to call the productive economy. Because being engaged in care is apparently not productive, just to let you know, you're at leisure. So when childcare services and schools closed, there was a huge impact on carers and parents. Local authority social care and support services were also withdrawn from disabled people, and personal assistants were maybe ill or isolating, and other services withdrawn, leaving disabled people isolated and in extremely perilous conditions. And as Glasgow Disability Alliance has highlighted, COVID and lockdown supercharged the existing inequalities, particularly amongst disabled people. And I think all of this underscores how central care and support is to us all. As I say, we all provide and receive care and support at different times and in different ways over the lifetime. And so that reality and realisation is what has led the Commission for a Gender Equal Economy to put care at the heart of our report, at the centre of our report, which is a call to action for a caring economy now. In the way that we functioned as a commission was we took evidence from, we worked across the 4 nations of the UK, taking evidence from women and men, women's organisations, community organisations, third sector, academics, think tanks, government officials at different levels. And on the basis of that evidence and a wealth of commissioned papers, which are all on the website, and I would thoroughly recommend you engaging with them. So there's papers on income, on social care, transport, housing, public procurement. Often maybe folk don't immediately want to jump to public procurement as their bedtime reading, but it does hold the key to quite a lot of this. So housing, as I say, tax and wealth. So the thorny issues of tax and wealth are there as well. And on the basis of all of that, we've come up with this vision for a caring economy. And that vision prioritises care of one another and our environment. It's a vision that ensures we all have time to care, as well as time free from care. That enables a greater sharing of care between women and men, and that sees investment in care as essential infrastructure. Investment in social infrastructure is fundamental and produces higher economic returns than other areas of investment. So in last week's Our World Reimagined conversation with Catherine Trebeck, the discussion focused on a wellbeing economy. And the caring economy drills down into a wellbeing economy, bringing together wellbeing, sustainability and gender equality to combine in that caring economy. And in our recommendations, we've gathered our recommendations under 8 steps, 8 areas for action. That we need to re-envision what we mean by the economy, and that means including care and the provision of care and valuing that care. We need to invest in social and physical infrastructure. That means care facilities, care services, a universal care service. That means that people receive care and support that meets their needs regardless of where they are, and that public procurement has a lot to do with that, and the flexibilities and engagement with appropriate providers for appropriate needs at different levels. But investing in social care shows significant, almost 3 times the economic returns that investing in other areas of the economy. And I can come back to that later. We need to transform paid and unpaid work so that combining paid work and care, if that's what you want to do, that's possible to do. And that means engaging with the legal entitlements to parental leave, to carers leave, and flexibility, and being serious about flexible working and working flexibly. And perhaps there are many lessons to come from our recent experiences with COVID. And interestingly, 3 out of 4 men support this idea of transforming paid and unpaid work, and that women and men should share care more equally. Now, we've seen some interesting figures about time use during lockdown and the pandemic, and how some of that care, that division of gendered labour has not really shifted, or if it has shifted, it's shifted back to women. So that men are saying that men and women should share care more equally. Well, let's see some meat on those bones, as it were. Our 4th action is investing in a caring social security system based on dignity and autonomy. And that kind of language is perhaps becoming more familiar to us in Scotland, with a social security system that is emerging and that is committed to being built on human rights, dignity, respect and autonomy. Another area that requires transformation is the tax system across the UK. where all sorts of tax allowances, and taxation measures end up benefiting those who are better off. And also we need to have a look at the bigger area, other big areas of taxation around corporation tax and taxation avoidance. We need to refocus fiscal and monetary policy on building a caring economy, investing in a social infrastructure. And again, not to keep everything to Scotland, but there's some important messages here in Scotland with the levers that we have, and that includes the Scottish National Investment Bank, thinking about care and the care economy as an appropriate partners and appropriate targets for investment, and that investment in care is not somehow or other secondary or less valuable or legitimate than investment in other areas. And there's also some recommendations about something that's been very topical across the UK this week in terms of borrowing powers and powers between the powers of spending between different levels of governance. And that we need to work to develop a trade system that is socially and environmentally sustainable. And as we teeter on the precipice of a no-deal Brexit, healthcare and social care services can't be traded off in those deals. And finally, we need to work internationally and collectively to transform the international economic system. And that includes the systems of national accounts that traditionally haven't considered care as an economic contribution. So there's lots of substantive actions, lots of political and economic action that are about a shift from sentimentalising care on our doorsteps to politicising care. So we maybe need a bit less clapping and a lot more investment. And our experience, I think, collectively under COVID has demonstrated how unequal our society and economy are. The economy isn't working for many, many people. Care and health workers and other key workers in shops and supply chains have kept us going, but they're amongst the lowest paid. So that, amongst many other things, reinforces the need now to flip what we value and how we reward that value. And I think our vision and our recommendations are not a work of fantasy. These are tested, researched, deliberated proposals. And as our chair, Professor Diane Elson, who'll be known to many people, said at the report launch, we've had the narrative for a while, now we have the numbers. So with 3% of GDP invested in care yields sufficient fiscal revenue to cover that outlay. So we get the money back when we invest in care. So gender analysis of social infrastructure investment across OECD countries has consistently found that investment in care has a higher economic return. So that means shifting the mindset of hard hat wearing politicians focused on their shovel ready projects, all these words familiar to you, to focus on building care facilities and expanding a well-paid, skilled workforce. The other numbers that we have that are really important are popular support. And this is where things start to get maybe a bit more political, and certainly some of these figures will be of interest or should be of interest to those who are preparing political manifestos for the forthcoming Scottish Parliament or any other elections. So our polling around the Commission's recommendations showed that people in Scotland place a very high importance on well-being and standard of life. 68% of the population prioritising well-being and quality of a standard of life, and 80% of those over 65 felt that. Over 60% of people in Scotland thought health, education and social care are more important to the economy than technology and transport infrastructure. 87% of people in Scotland think provision of quality care is the mark of a good society. And 75% think economic equality is also the mark of a good society. And over 60% think that should be a political priority. And 85% of people in Scotland think social care support should be accessible and needs, not wealth-based. And finally, there is strong support for tax rises to pay for health, social care, childcare and living wage. So in our call to action, we set out the why we need a gender equal, caring economy to halt those persistent inequalities, the what, those 8 steps of action, areas of action, and the how, a serious conversation on taxation, on taxing wealth, maximising available resources, and that means taxation from corporations, and that by investing in care, boosting investment in construction initially, but building an expanded workforce, which in turn pays tax and opens up paid work opportunities for carers and parents and others. So we need a conversation on tax, and a conversation that acknowledges that our current structures don't work for anybody except the very well off. So the gender budget analysis of the UK Women's Budget Group over the years has also reflected how some of the tax giveaways that we've seen, which mainly benefit highly paid men, have been at the expense of social security and protection for older women, lone parents, and particularly Black and minority ethnic women with children. So bailing out the banks and relieving tax burdens, that language comes very easily to us, have been at the cost of public services. And arguably 10 years of reduction in public services and local authority funding has been a significant factor in the preparedness and ability to respond to COVID at the local level in the UK and in other countries. So I'll finish now just to say, a caring economy is a whole systems vision that puts care at the core of gender equality, environmental sustainability, and economic well-being. So what's not to like about a gender equal economy?
Thank you so much. It's an absolutely beautiful vision. Yeah, now let's get stuck into the practicalities of making it happen. Rebecca McClune has asked a question that was certainly at the top of my mind, which is, you mentioned that investing in care has 3 times the return of other investments. This fact is incredible, says Rebecca. Why, with stats like that, is it so difficult to convince budget controllers to invest in care?
It is the huge question, but it's about a mindset. It's about a mindset that sees care as voluntary, it sees care as effective labour, that doesn't value people providing care in our own homes for our own family members or others, and it doesn't value the work that people do. And that's why I'm quite trenchant, I suppose, in that comment about sentimentalising care. We need to stop doing that and start politicising care, because there's a kind of masking goes on there when we say, oh, don't, aren't people wonderful, isn't it? And it's a very emotional level argument. It needs to be an economic argument, because the stats are there: 200,000 paid jobs in Scotland, 3.4 billion in the Scottish economy, over 1 million unpaid carers. And then across the OECD countries, 40 countries, colleagues Sue Himmelweis and Jerome de Henau have repeated this analysis over the last few years. And in all these countries, you see a higher return on investment in care jobs than elsewhere. So it's about shifting that mindset that investment in infrastructure means things that you can build and point at, and that you can talk about them as being hard infrastructure and shovel ready and wear a hard hat and have your photo op. Because they are much more, attractive, and they appeal to this idea that that's infrastructure.
Well, it's also interesting because you mentioned the Scottish National Investment Bank. How has this been received there? As a starting point in Scotland, then.
Well, we're at the start of a conversation, I think. The bank isn't yet up and running, so things are a bit delayed there. But it's a conversation that we've had from WISE, that we've had, and Engender and Close the Gap, Scottish Women's Budget Group, and others have made representations to the officials, to the committees, to the banks, and we have seen some movement there. But I think it's about maintaining, starting and maintaining that conversation. And the more voices that are added to that conversation, that we need to be talking about investment in care, not as a drag, because we talk about investment in childcare or investment in social care and support as somehow or other it's a drag on our public spending, rather than It's about the realisation of rights and well-being. It's about improved economic returns, 2.7 more higher returns on investment in social care, 6.3 times more jobs for women if we invest in care.
We're sharing links here on the right. I was very struck by those stats you used at the end of your presentation there. I mean, I don't know if you know where they come from, but we could put up links there, because this is really powerful stuff, isn't it? When you expose those figures, it matters.
Absolutely.
Do you think though that the public is willing to think about care in such stark terms as value and worth?
I think people would want to feel valued, and that what we do is valuable, and that it's not a constant battle against the clock, against institutions, or with people making decisions that we're maybe not involved in. And a number of years ago, I was director of Carers Scotland, and there was a lot of strong feeling from our members and our membership, because people are constantly, or feel like they're constantly engaged in a fight, in a struggle, and what we've seen as well is or what we need to be factoring, the people receiving care and people looking for care and people managing their own care, that needs to be accorded a social value as well. So I think it's all bound up in that care and being cared for is a valuable thing to do, and a valuable thing to be and to receive. And so, or we can look at it another way. Why do we pay a plumber who does a very good job? And we need plumbers, don't get me wrong, we need plumbers and electricians and all the rest of it. But why is their rate of pay so high compared to a childcare worker, a worker in a care home? So why is it that those real proper things in the real proper economy are valued, and that caring isn't? And I think less sentimentalizing, less being an emotional and a conversation about effective labour, things that we do because we love people. We're not going to do any less caring or love people less, but we need. And so when it comes to employment practices and having flexibility in paid employment to be able to combine. I mean, we've had decades of talking about work-life balance and family-friendly policies and all the rest of it. Just how realistic are they for many people?
Now, COVID obviously brings quite a lot of this to a head, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, we very much more aware of the value of carers and the work that carers do, be it paid or unpaid. And on the other hand, though, because you're fighting different ends of this, on the other hand, people feeling scared and shielding and isolated and lonely, and their needs are unmet. There's a question come through to me privately, not on the Q&A, which is, what do you think about how unpaid carers have been supported during the COVID crisis? Does having a gender equal cabinet in government really make a difference to achieving a more gender equal economy? There are two questions there, actually. That's never mind. So the first is,
do you need questions?
What's your view on the treatment of unpaid carers in Scotland right now under COVID? And the second one, does having a gender equal cabinet equal a more gender equal economy?
I think one of the answers I would give to how unpaid carers have experienced COVID is that those inequalities and that invisibility existed before COVID, and it's got a lot worse. Now, in part, and I don't think that's for any malintent, nobody's set about to give folk a harder time, far from it. People, governments have been working very hard to try and alleviate the impacts of this virus and its economic and social and other consequences. But because we don't always start with that question of how is what's going on affecting different people differently? And so we need to think about carers. We need to think about how this is affecting women on their own with kids. We need to think about how this is affecting women facing domestic abuse. Now, there was some very early, very good thinking on that when everybody was returning, or we were returned to our homes, which are not necessarily a haven for many people. And so I think for unpaid carers, there's, again, it's about a systemic change. That we had legislation introduced a number of years ago that isn't being fully implemented, and along with, say, the public sector equality duty, where we need to see a fair bit of stepping up from public authorities and how they regard these types of legislation, that they are about making better policy and making better decisions that lead to better outcomes for people, rather than seeing them as some kind of encumbrance or punitive. So that's for unpaid carers. I think there's a lot more can be done, and I think the increase in carers allowance is an example of what it is possible to do under devolved powers, but it's also an example of how much further things need to go. As for a gender equal cabinet, everybody needs to take a starting point that political decisions and public resourcing decisions need to be about eliminating inequality and advancing equality.
And there's been a lot of rhetoric, hasn't there, around that for, well, I've covered this field for coming up for 40 years. And say for half that time, we've heard an awful lot about balancing inequalities, and we have never seen it be worse in Scotland. The gap between rich and poor has never been greater. How on earth, given that as a background, can we make people walk the talk? That you said authorities know what needs doing. Why don't they do it? What are we up against here? Is it cultural, political? Why can't we do it like that?
Well, we could. I mean, we've seen so much happen like that with COVID. That money has been made available. We're going to have to do some reckoning. I'm also very interested to know what's going to happen to areas where spending commitments had been given and that money is now having to be wired elsewhere. I think we need to be very vigilant about that. And I say that with disclosure as the independent chair of the Equalities and Budgets Advisory Group of the Scottish Government. And so we need to be looking there as well. So why is it not happening? I think part of it is, how long have you got?
About a couple of minutes anyway.
So, I mean, I could go in all sorts of directions. Are we Thatcher's children? And the individualistic approach to life that we were encouraged to have, and that we're a property owning democracy rather than we are a well-being democracy and economy. So people need to make a choice. And ultimately, if we want to be individualistic about it, then bring it back to yourself. What kind of care and support do you want for yourself and your family? What kind of conditions do you want in a residential and care home for your parents? And that these are human rights arguments. These are arguments and needs around well-being. And when we talk about taxation, we're talking about the kinds of public services that we all want to enjoy and that we all want everybody to be able to access. Yeah. And so I've been really heartened by the polling data that we had around the Commission, and to see such very high levels of support for social care, investment in social care, investment in a living wage, and that people were prepared to pay tax. Now, not everybody, older people and much younger people, so people at the start of their working life and people towards the end of their working life, were more keen than people in the middle. And why is that? People in the middle. So there's a fair bit of shift needs to happen there, but that's also people who are paying mortgages, who've got kids, who've got all sorts of financial pressures, and that we have seen in-work poverty increase over the last 20 years. So the kind of wage stagnation that we've had across Europe and in the UK needs to be addressed.
Now, I think that relates to a couple of questions that have come in. The first from Rebecca McClune, saying, a lot of the actions you recommend seem to be very high level, things that the government needs to do. What can we do on the ground to make a difference? And I think you touched on that there, but let's take it further. And then Dee Sheehan has said, linked to Rebecca's question, does this have to be top down? How about local authorities who are austerity struck and can't raise taxes? The case may be better received at this level, but can they deliver?
Yep, and all good questions. There are a lot of very high level recommendations in the report, from all sorts of stuff around taxation at a very high level. But one of the recommendations is about council tax. And this will be familiar to many people with an interest in council tax in Scotland. For my sins, I was a commissioner on the Commission on Local Tax Reform. And the recommendation in the Commission on a Gender Equal Economy is for a local income tax and land value tax. Where have we heard that before? So there needs to be a shift in political will there. And I think some political boldness about local taxation and about the allocation and direction of locally raised revenue. Rebecca's question about what can we do? What can we do? We can agitate at a local level. We can organise at a local level. We can, if we're not already part of an organisation, become part of an organisation. Start your own gender equal local economy group. There's lots of, and I think one of the things that's coming out of the recent experience under COVID is that there's lots and lots of these conversations happening in lots and lots of different places. And so, you know, there is opportunity, I think, to try and not just talk, but actually create some of this change. But I think demonstrating, and you know, again, in a former life, being campaigns manager for Oxfam and others, being told we need to demonstrate public interest. We need to demonstrate, you know, the politicians saying to us consistently, we need, you know, we can act if we see that there's public interest in this. Well, when over 80% of people polled in Scotland are saying we want to see investment in social care, there's public interest. And so I think, you know, acting in those ways.
Are there groups that you know about that people can join to make their voices heard in that way? Because yes, I absolutely hear what you're saying about, you know, start your own campaign. But if we all came together, there might be a big enough voice to be heard. So it'd be really interesting if anyone's got any indications, you know, in our participants, let us know, you know, where should we be adding our weight to make sure these messages are heard. And I agree with you, I'm hearing this on Radio 4, in forums I would never have expected to hear these issues being talked about, and they are. So there's an opportunity there. There's another question coming, because you mentioned in your presentation fears about health and care being traded off. I think that was in relation to Brexit. Beatrice Vegas is saying, how can that happen?
It's not my area of expertise, so I'll need to, you know, can't give a lot of detail, but it's a concern around the privatisation of healthcare services, and a concern that for an increase in privatisation of social care services as well. And you know, that we've seen, now that's not to say that privately organised social care is in and of itself a bad thing, but when we're dealing with multinational corporations rather than locally created, devised businesses that are responding to local needs or specific needs, then you enter a very different ballpark. And we also enter a ballpark of multinational corporations, multinational healthcare organisations, which is, you know, in your area of expertise, Penny. And these multinational corporations avoiding their tax responsibilities in this country and elsewhere.
And now I was so inspired by your vision, you know, for a caring world economy. You said it's important to work internationally. All I could think, and all my alarm bells were going off in my head, thinking, the USA, yeah, a caring economy? Do you think it's at all realistic? I mean, I know we're only 2 weeks away from an election there, but...
Well, I think we have a responsibility to demonstrate solidarity. and to send our you know, good wishes to people in the US. My goodness, are they facing choices? But I think as well, we have opportunity to offer some learning. We're a little tiny country with, you know, a small economy in world terms, but the UK is one of the, you know, the 5th largest economy in the world. But why is it that we have a structure that has produced and reproduced so much inequality, and that inequality and that inequality gap is of the type that we share with the United States? Unlike other countries where the inequality gaps in country are smaller. And that is about a shift in what we value and who we value and how we, I'm starting to use words of Marlon Waring that from New Zealand, who, you know, a scholar and activist that we've looked to over the years. But, and this isn't, you know, propaganda or rather a commentary on the Scottish government, but it's rather that the Scottish government, the Welsh government, Iceland and New Zealand have formed what's called the Wellbeing Economies Governments Group, which Catherine will have talked about last week, I'm sure. And so it's not just the argument that, well, it's okay for small countries to do it because you're smaller, but we can at least, we need to make a start somewhere. And we can, I think, share some of those experiences.
And bringing it right back home again, we've actually got quite a small window of opportunity here, haven't we? That COVID has given us the chance to really dig into this and think about it and share it. We're about to have Brexit descend on us in a way it hasn't yet. Now, how long have we got before we've got to make the changes that will yield action?
I think we need to act right now, because we've had opportunities in the past. We had the financial crash at the start, you know, 10, 12 years ago, and there was opportunity there to have a very different economic and monetary structure. And, well, we could just say they bottled it, to use a very colloquial phrase. So we do need bold action, and because we see all too quickly our own behaviours as well as political thinking rolls back onto what has come before. And at the moment, I mean, I think, you know, we could make a fair dent in the national debt if we all put in £1 for every time we've heard Build Back Better in the last few months. And colleagues in this field, and including, you know, Sally Witcher and others, saying, why would we want to build back? You know, we need to build forward and we need to build differently. And we know that. And it links to the question from earlier on, the very first question. Why, if we have this data, have we not seen the changes? And so it is about political accountability. It is about, we do have the narrative and we do have the numbers, and there needs to be that political action in response.
And we're up against big guns, though. I mean, I've got a cutting here from the Financial Times about billionaire fortunes hitting record levels in the pandemic. There are people actually making money out of what is happening right now.
Yeah.
That's in their interest to go back to the way it was before, build back better, or whatever you want to call it. How do we stop that?
I mean, how much evidence do we need? But I think as well, how much are people willing to tolerate? And what we have seen is that, how is it acceptable that there's a tolerance in a very general sense? That before the pandemic, 1.5 million people a day were going hungry in this country. Why is that tolerable in our economic and social structures? You look at tolerance another way, what people have to tolerate in their everyday lives. You know, the chaos of poverty, increasing. I was speaking with colleagues yesterday saying they're seeing rates of destitution in Glasgow higher than they've ever experienced in all their time in the third sector. So we can't tolerate that anymore. We can't say, well, that's just the way things are, because it cannot be acceptable. It can't be tolerable that that's the way things are. And the FT article you've just held up there, that people are standing to make fortunes from this, cannot be tolerable to as voters and as taxpayers. And the UK tax revenue is less than the EU average, yet we're fed a narrative of, well, we can't tax people, taxation is bad, why do you want to pay more taxation? But we pay less tax in the UK than we do in the EU 28. Tax giveaways, tax reliefs and exemptions have consistently benefited the better off and reinforced that idea that taxation is something to be avoided. Corporation tax is 19% in Scotland. From the Commission, we've argued that corporation tax in the UK is the lowest in the G7 and amongst the lowest in the G20, and it should be reinstated at 24%. And even the UK's Treasury, or HMRC, sorry, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs estimate that would be a 12.6 billion uplift a year if we reinstated corporation tax at 24%. Another idea around tax is about taxing dividend income. So not earnings, but the money that folk are going to make. And taxing a small tax on financial transactions. A small tax every, on electronic taxations that could raise about 6.8 billion annually. So when we talk about tax, there's always oh, the tax man's going to take away all my money. Well, tax man doesn't exist. And the more we pay into the system, the more we have that we can give back out from the system. To have a social care investment and a healthcare service and an education and a childcare service that benefits us all.
Thank you so much. I don't know about all of the people that are joining us in this, but my dander's up. Let's hear what Kathleen Caskey of the Glasgow Third Sector Interface Network thinks of what she's heard. Hi, Kathleen.
Hello. It's a difficult job, this, when you're trying to listen to someone who's interesting in Angela at the same time trying to formulate a response in your head. But what I love about Angela's work is it starts from this stuff about, human rights and equality, which is a bit woolly and and then she starts talking about, actual tax rates, and it's this percent and it's that percent. And Angela's work actually takes these big ideas that we all, would sign up to and starts putting the pounds, shilling and pence on them. And that's why, economists shouldn't just be economists. They should be taking that wider look. So I think, a wonderful tribute to Angela's work today. I think she's brought us a bit of a Trojan horse here. She's come in and told us she's going to talk about, gender equality, and we will nod our heads because that's something we're all in favour of. And then she's basically proposing, some kind of revolution. I think she's a sort of secret Trotskyite or perhaps a John McClane, given that I know you're a South Side girl. So our local revolutionary hero, John McClane. So the reflections I would have from a third sector perspective, and what I'm giving you here is a sector perspective back on what Angela said. I am fascinated by some of this because one of the things, if you created this kind of care economy, I'm sitting here thinking about how the third sector works. Now, from its earliest times in the United Kingdom, which was under Queen Elizabeth I, I believe, was the start of charities, if you like, in the UK. I don't have a date for Scotland. We probably did it before, but nobody wrote it down. So, throughout our history as the third sector, we've changed, we've flowed, we've changed our business models. We've worked with the churches initially, who were the key players, 500, 600 years ago. Now we're sort of very much engaged with the state. But also one of the business models we use, and one of the words that I'm slightly scared, why is nobody talking about profit? Because let's be honest, from the third sector, we rely on profit. The big trusts, the Robertson Trust, people like that fund our work, they come from the private profit of individual organisations that used to exist. You have this whole new, Angela was talking about billionaires, the sort of Bill Gates philanthropists. They have billions of money, they have more, but they are good people because they give a lot to charity. It has to be said, it goes to the charities they personally care about, So they're shaping the world in terms of their own issues, their own things that they care about, and not what anyone else cares about. But that's something we do. And many of the organisations in the third sector will be looking at the big philanthropists. Indeed, over recent years, we've all been encouraged to become social enterprises. So we're generating our own profit to do our charitable work, which seems a long way from working with the churches in Tudor England. But that's where our sector has survived for so long as a sector, because we've had that flexibility. So to me, the challenge from this kind of revolution of the economy is, right, though the third sector needs to change its business model, its funding models, and we can do that. We've shown we can do that, but we need to be thoughtful about that, I think. An issue you touched on, Angela, was around public procurement. And I think that illustrates my point about the third sector, because that's another route we've been told. We need to go down procurement. We need to compete with the private sector, or indeed public sector or quasi-public sector, to try and get contracts. And many organisations have very successfully received, big contracts, multi-million contracts built there. And there's always been part of the third sector that doesn't see itself that way. It sees itself as community-based, and it feels it's having to jump through hoops to do that basic work in the communities, the kind of care work that, as you say, Angela, has never been valued, never been adequately paid for. So I can see where we would come in that. Angela talked about households doing, care for people, leave for care. That was an interesting one, the idea that you're entitled to leave for care. Well, I would throw into that, you should also have an entitlement to leave for volunteering. Now, some organisations, East Ayrshire Council, I know, does this, where you get paid volunteer leave, and it's a day a year. Now, no community organisation in this city can be bothered with a volunteer who's a day a year. We have to vet them, we have to train them, we have to invest in them, and to have someone who'll turn up for one day a year, that's not a meaningful concession. Volunteering leave or care leave has to be once a week or twice a month, or something where people can really build up the links, the social glue that keeps our communities together and enables not just people to care privately for their own relatives, but be part of a wider network of care based in that community. Again, we saw this during COVID. We saw the formal third sector response. We think there was 2 million meals or something delivered by the third sector during the first lockdown. And that was supported by an informal response where neighbours were looking out for not just people in the... So there's something in the human spirit there, Angela, that you speak to. There's something in the human spirit that is at the basis of what we do as a third sector. And yes, thinking about words, which I've said a lot, I'm talking about the third sector. We don't call ourselves charities anymore. And that again reflects how, we're maybe talking about the same things, but sometimes we're using very different words. So when we're talking about third sector communities and volunteering, we are actually talking about the care economy. We're just perhaps not using the same words. So I think what you said today, Angela, has been very, very stimulating. And I'm sitting here thinking, how would a big charity or a small charity, where would they get their money from? So we're starting to think about that. And I won't go into that because that starts to get my brain ticking over, and then I'll start speaking really quickly and no one will understand me. But I want to thank you, Angela, because I did find that really stimulating, and I can see where your macroeconomic revolutionary ideas, storming the barricades here, but pretending we're not, I can see how those revolutionary ideas translate down to the third sector and to the people working with communities of place and communities of interest. So I think we will follow you over those barricades, Angela, waving our red flags, but we'll pretend that we're not.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Fantastic. Stay on the line though, because Angela, I wanted to bring you back in. We've got a few minutes to fill, that we can carry on talking, and I'm sure people would want to. Kathleen's points about profit not necessarily being a dirty word. Do we, and your point about third sector, the language around all this is really complex. Do you think we need a new language? I mean, could the third sector suddenly become the caring economy? Angela, I wondered what your thoughts were about that.
The third, I mean, as Kathleen has said, the third sector is an enormous part of the caring economy. I mean, Kathleen talking about 2 million meals delivered through community infrastructure, and which again reinforced the weaknesses in some of the public infrastructure as well. Some of the things that have been dismantled in recent years, and I think. So, I mean, it is very much about recognising all parts of the economy, and that the economy isn't what we might think it is. I mean, I'm not an economist. And
You should be.
thinking about the economy as, it's all numbers, or that's oil and gas, or it's big complicated equations. It's not. The economy is the third sector. It is our transactions in the local shop. It is our online banking. It is all of these things. And the model that we have at the moment is a model that is predicated on the provision of unpaid care. And that has never been factored in. And that's what we need to change.
Can I ask as well, how do we, this is a question that's come from Mary McCallum Sullivan, saying, what can we learn from the bank's failure of 2008 onwards about how, brackets not, close brackets, to change a mindset? Why don't we learn these lessons, and what can we do now to make sure that those lessons are learned?
I think we need to keep saying to ourselves, and I don't mean talking to the mirror. I mean, I do feel like a hologram in that I say these things in lots of different places and not very much changes. But things do change. But we need to be having these conversations with anybody and everybody. And we need to be having these conversations with the politicians, with people who are making decisions on our behalf, and electing people who are going to make the decisions that reflect what our values are. And to just, to talk about profit there for a moment, the profit has to be, we do need a system of taxation that isn't going to impoverish philanthropic giving, but is actually going to be about maximising the responsibility, the returns, maximising, turn that around, minimise tax avoidance.
Yeah.
Because it is a human rights obligation to maximise available resources for the progressive realisation of rights. And that means that tax avoidance is a human rights infringement.
Kathleen, you were clapping there. Tell me your response to that, but you've got about 30 seconds.
I just think tax avoidance is a human right. I just think that's a wonderful phrase, and words matter. So thank you, Angela. That phrase was a gift.
Thank you. So the language is developing as we speak. Now there's one final question for you, Angela O'Hagan, and again, it's 30 seconds or so. What key things, and where can we find your list of key things, if there's more than one, would you like to see in next year's election manifestos? At literally seconds to go.
I want to see a commitment to investment in social infrastructure. Social care and support is social infrastructure, and that's what we need to invest in. And you can find out lots more about that at wbg.org.uk and join the Scottish Women's Budget Group.
Thank you so much. And in fact, Sarah Cowan has posted that link in the chat group there. And I will personally be double clicking on that as soon as we finish this call, because again, I'm convinced we've all got to come together to make this happen and not to be ignored any longer. Before we go, I'd just like to say that our next Our World Reimagined event is happening next Wednesday between 2 to 3 p.m, Wednesday the 28th of October, where we will be hearing from Leslie Thompson of the Scottish Government on the National Performance Framework, which has certainly been referenced prior to now. I would like to extend my personal deep thanks to both Angela O'Hagan and Kathleen Caskey. Yeah, I'm going to have to go away and have a wee lie down because, again, my dander is up. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's joined this wonderful discussion. Let's keep it going. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.